Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with journalist Dan Knight. We're talking about mortgage renewals and the impending economic crisis here in Canada. Dan, based on your research, with all these mortgage renewals coming up and people being underwater, how bad can it get?
I mean, it can get bad there. If you think about it, 67% of Canadians spend more servicing their debt than their American counterparts. Um, with the with the interest rates that we're experiencing right now, with the unemployment slightly ticking higher, I mean, we're looking at an economic catastrophe.
Yeah, it's a pretty dire out there. Let's talk a little bit about cause and effect here. Through your research, I'm sure you've looked at this or have an opinion on it. But Canada does have high inflation. We have high rates. What do you see as the causes of that?
Well, I mean, obviously, coming out of the pandemic, Tony, we were looking at a surge in goods and services. Um, we were looking at, obviously, the supply chains were effect, but moving forward, we're out of the pandemic right now, so we can no longer blame supply chains. Businesses have switched their supply chains, so we're now seeing a problem with specifically housing.
Right.
The Bank of Canada has put out their quarterly report, and they say that supply and demand is a huge problem when it comes to housing. They say that, yes, immigration will bring up GDP, but it's also going to damper inflation. And what I mean by that is it's actually going to increase housing costs, which is part of the inflation calculation.
Right.
When we calculate inflation, we're also looking at the carbon tax, which the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklin, has said that if we were to cut the carbon tax out, it would reduce the inflation by 0.6%. That's a huge number there, Tony. And what that means is if the interest rates were lower, or if the inflation was lower, would the Bank of Canada have to keep the interest rates as high as they have?
Yeah, and so and this is being part of the political debate now, right? So we're seeing that in terms of our political discourse, whether the carbon tax should be axed and other, counter-inflationary measures should be taken. What should the government be doing about this, in your estimation?
Well, I think that the problem right now there, Tony, is the supply and demand for housing. I think that would
Right.
probably be number one. On one hand, we have X amount of houses available to Canadians. Now, when we add an influx of immigration, obviously the we have more demand for housing than that's available. Now, I believe the estimate for housing that Canadians or the government needs to build about 5 million houses by 2030. Currently, they're on track to build about 200,000 houses per year. Now, if we look at that in terms of in immigration numbers, the numbers that this government wants to bring in is about 500,000 new immigrants per year. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound sustainable to me.
Right. And it's starting to become a point of political debate, which is rare in this country. Usually, immigration has been kind of sacrosanct or a bit of a red line in this country, as opposed to other countries where it is debated, top to bottom. But now it is becoming part of the political debate about whether just because of our ability to accommodate the number of new immigrants that we are on a yearly basis, that we might be at a breaking point. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Well, it's not just me that's seeing it there, Tony. It's the Bank of Canada is issuing in their quarterly reports that there's a supply and demand problem. It's not me that's making this up. It's the Bank of Canada. And Statistics Canada also has these numbers. They have a number that's telling this government how much housing supply we have and what's available to them. They know there's studies out there, Tony, that says if we bring in X amount of people, rent's going to go up this amount much. I mean, it's simple economics.
Are you getting a sense that the government's taking it more seriously now?
Well, Mark Miller has taken action. He's reduced the student. I believe they brought in 500,000 students, or excuse me, that's probably not the right number.
A million.
They are reducing their student intake by about 30%, I believe. So that will have a number, but not immediate, because we already have students in Canada. So you won't see an immediate impact. However, it would maybe see something next year. And this Canadian government is introducing incentives for developers to build new housing for rentals. So we are seeing a little uptick in that. However, the problem is no Canadian here is going to be able to purchase new startups.
Right.